Anno Domini Nostrae Jesu Christi, the year of our Lord, Jesus Christ. As we passed directly from 1 BC to AD 1, the disappointment of man barely took a breath. This pivot from prehistory to post-history is based on the assumed year of Christ's birth. But carbon dating the Shroud of Turin suggests God's heir entered the world circa 1978, around the same time that style of tea towel was available in Woolworths. So the new millennium was already on a sticky wicket when it came to getting shit right. While the three wise men successfully followed the guiding light to the Magi, collectives of the not-so-sage hopelessly followed less promising objects such as biofluorescent mammals, Tottenham Hotspurs, and Routemaster buses. And as if these mental malfunctions weren't bad enough, those prone to failure had the might of the Roman Empire lying in wait for the inevitable stumble, and the Romans didn't take any prisoners. When Marcus Agrippa built an aqueduct out of papier-mâché, the Senate banished his family from Naples. When Gaius Hummus began the ancient craft of bookbinding using celery, Caesar had centurions whip him to death with said vegetable. And when Marcus Fartacus came up with a mobile shitting closet, he was set afloat on the Tiber with only a tin of peas and no can opener. It's little wonder that given these specious efforts at progress, we are oft drawn to ask, what have the Romans ever done for us? I'm Sir General Roland Frampton, and I'll be recognising the sweat, blood and tears of those who didn't quite make the grade. So the next time you find yourself describing the beauty of Alphonse Giraud's first commercial photographic camera to an influencer or a TikTok whore, please bear in mind Hercule Snapper's earlier prototype was stolen from him by opium dealers seeking refuge from the Battle of Kowloon. We live in a world of fine margins.
A Brief History of Failure, presented by Sir General Roland Frampton. Episode 2, Anno Domini.
So let us away to Anno Domini, where the wine flowed, the orgies groaned, and millennial man was on the brink of some ruinous failures. Emperor Claudius's invasion of Britain in AD 43 established an island occupation that would last 400 years. Britannia's Celtic tribes folded like warm Twixes as the Romans swept all before them. Their progress remained unchecked until Boudicca, Celtic queen of the Iceni tribe, took matters into her own hands.
The Iceni effectively ruled over East Anglia, and much like today, it was a province of scant interest. However, by AD 60, Boudicca and her legion of followers were on a warpath, razing Colchesterium, Londinium and Verulamium to the ground.
Caitlin Propercare is an authority on the Britons and joins me today in this pet-friendly cafe in Leighton Buzzard, which is the actual site of Boudicca's death. Miss Propercare.
Caitlin's fine.
Miss Propercare, what were Boudicca and the Iceni's main grievances against the Romans?
Well, the enslaved Iceni weren't best pleased with how Nero's troops were going about the occupation. The way of life of Britons had changed radically since the Romans barged their way in. They'd removed what was a robust customs procedure at all the major ports. They'd halted the production of English wine, choosing instead to import thousands of gallons of Italian pish. And then they disbanded the National Floral Village of the Year competition.
Boudicca's uprising was violently crushed in short order, I believe.
Despite being one of Britain's most glorified leaders, her fight back barely lasted 6 months. Hardly worthy of a statue on the embankment, eh?
She put some 80,000 Romans to the sword, and didn't she inspire several tribute warriors from the East Anglia region?
Yes, but they were a sorry bunch. Isabel of Ipswich lost her first fight to a stonemason in the Black Swan. Boudicca showed signs of promise initially, but soon lost interest. Queen Pox wasn't really a name the Britons could get behind, and Gwen of Great Beelings stood on a rake and bled to death through her nose.
Thank you, Miss Propercare.
For fuck's sake, Caitlin would have been fine.
While Rome burned and Nero fiddled, a retaining wall was erected by Hadrian to keep the marauding Scottish mentalists at bay. However, another wall, built by Andrew, failed to keep the barbaric Visigoths from invading the Roman territories. As St. Patrick chased the remaining anacondas off the Irish mainland, the pillaging of Rome by the Vandals put an end to La Dolce Vita, and in AD 476 the Western Roman Empire collapsed. Britons celebrated their emancipation, but their revelling was short-lived as Anglo-Saxon eyes regarded the island enviously, and slowly but surely they drew their plans against us. It's AD 515, nearly tea time for most of us, and the Anglo-Saxons have taken a vice-like Germanic grip of the Sceptred Isle. The advance of this outrageous band of impostors wasn't all plain sailing, however, as allegedly their progress was halted at Mount Badon by the war commander King Arthur. Wally Davies, archivist and pickleball guru, picks up the story.
It was here on Somerset Downs that Arthur, King of the Britons, laid siege to the Saxons, who were goose-stepping through the English countryside in a humourless but highly efficient manner. And of course they were all naked.
Okay, can we just lose some of the cultural stereotyping?
Just saying.
So Arthur was a real historical figure, not some medieval comic book writer's flight of fancy.
He was real, but he wasn't all that, to be honest. In fact, the Battle of Badon was a right cock-up.
But he alone was said to have slain nearly 900 of these sausage eaters.
Who's bloody stereotyping now?
So why was the battle not the success it was previously thought to be?
Well, for a start, it was always assumed Arthur had the support of the Knights of the Round Table to go into battle with. Problem was, he only actually had a square table, and while you can get legions of men around a round table, you can only get 4 round a square one, including him, and 2 of those were off looking for a cup. And then he got his sword stuck
in a stone.
I mean, you couldn't make this shit up.
At the end of the first modern millennium, Charlemagne was championing Christianity in the West. In the East, Arabia went Muslim big time after the death of Muhammad. And in the West, which is the bit in the middle, Scandinavian seafarers were making a right nuisance of themselves. These were, of course, the Vikings. I'm outside Lindisfarne Monastery on Holy Island, where the Vikings made a successful amphibious landing on or around 793. With me is the head of anthropology at King's and huge bacon fan, Rhys Withenuts, to tell us about the educational system the Vikings established shortly thereafter.
Great to be with you, Sir Roland. So while braver, more popular warriors affixed prominent nose guards to their helmets and headed off to conquer the provinces of Northumbria, Mercia and East Grinstead, Igor the Boneless, Ragnar the Spurious and Techi the Wonder Dog were left behind to establish the first Viking primary school and educate the island's youngest inhabitants in the ways of the Norsemen. With nothing more than a B.Tech diploma in panel beating between the three of them, they nonetheless set about building the first school and then the desk and then the chair for the singular pupil that would attend. The student was the adopted daughter of a Lindisfarne monk who was responsible for harvesting the monastery's crop of soft fruits every year. Employing the ancient Viking saying, "Moderately wise a man should be," Igor the Boneless limited his teaching time to anatomy. Ragnar the Spurious imparted his knowledge of barefaced lying, while Techi the Wonder Dog thought it best not to bother. The end-of-year results were appalling. The pupils' grades were literally in the cesspit. When King Rollo learned of this disaster and the stain upon his proud nation of crazed longshippmen, he took swift action. Fearing vengeful reprisals from the Swedish education watchdog Ulfsted, King Rollo dispatched a dog called Dill, Mr. Ben of 52 Festive Road, and Baby Clanger to Holy Island, where they would swiftly disembowel the three educators and slaughter all the Lindisfarne monks.
Viking royalty such as Bloodaxe and Forkbeard would commute regularly to the Isles to satisfy their pillaging fetishes. But it was Canute who brought peace and prosperity to the land. While popular, Canute's reign was tempered by his desire for an English bride. Before landing his first wife, Elgif of Northampton, Canute unsuccessfully courted a succession of regional munters. There was Gunhilda of Staines, who was half woman, half haystack. Estrid of Runcorn, whose high-pitched laugh could rattle furniture. The toll this search took on Canute meant he wouldn't see past his 42nd birthday, which is a big one in Denmark with a lot of fleur de bulle, which is similar to a marshmallow. With Canute gone and the last Viking invasion repelled at Stamford Bridge in Chelsea, Edward the Confessor would restore Anglo-Saxon rule. 23 years of solid German efficiency followed, only to be undone when Edward's named heir, Harold Godwinson, ascended to the throne, but only lasted a mere 10 months. On the 14th of October 1066, Harold thought it a good idea to give immigration officials a day off at the seaside town of Hastings. With me is Amy Brioche, whose great-great-great-grandmother was on the Bayeux Tapestry stitching team. Nice to meet you, Amy.
Bonjour, hello.
Amy, the tapestry wasn't the only depiction of King Harold's defeat by the Duke of Normandy, was it?
Oh, zut alors, mais non. The first representation of the Battle of Hastings was produced from camembert, but was lost to the unseasonably high temperatures in the following spring.
I see. And what of the story around Stan the Magnificent?
Oh, yes, Stan. He offered to have his entire body tattooed with battle scenes. Malheureusement, he was highly allergic to ink, and he passed away in some agony.
What part of the tapestry did your great-great-great-grandmother work on?
Well, this is a little embarrassing because she was given the job of crocheting the L going into Harold's eye. But she was, cheeky, and she kept stitching the arrow onto his pee-pee.
Excuse me?
His penis. Granny was repeatedly told to correct her cheekiness, but she insisted on keeping the arrow firmly in his crotch. She was thrown off the team.
Indeed, but her stitching legacy is clearly alive and well through you. What is it you're making there?
Oh, this? This is the Grimsby blanket.
And which battle does that depict?
The Cod Wars between Iceland and you, roast beef.
I notice you're wearing delicate white cotton gloves. Is that because the blanket is so fragile?
No, I have impetigo. Look, just one more adduct to stitch on and it's done.
With the Norman conquest of England squared away, William the Bastard was crowned King William I on Christmas Day 1066. William famously ordered the compilation of the Doomsday Book, a survey of the land holdings the bastard held throughout his kingdom. The book was a vicious, spiteful tool of taxation, but its influence was foreshortened due to the fact peasants were unable to comprehend neither the text nor the commands of William's agents, as it was all in Latin. Redire Magnus Nasus, the bastard's tax collectors would scream at bewildered serfs who failed to comprehend the simple directive. Pay up, big nose. This issue remained even after the survey was turned into an audiobook by the Guild of Town Criers. As the House of Normandy busied itself securing tax breaks for the top 1%, European Christians set about reconquering Jerusalem when Pope Urban II ignited an armed pilgrimage to the Holy Land. So began years of religious crusades that would fuck us all up for centuries to come. Cheers, Urban. The Crusades were a brutal affair. No quarter was given by either side. Jerusalem was captured and lost. Damascus was lost and found. Constantinople was deemed a score draw, and Shiraz wouldn't stop whining. Professor Milton Shades from Stanford University picks up on one of the lesser-known crusades.
While Richard Lionheart led the King's Crusade into Jerusalem, Theobald of Strasbourg marched his army into Luxembourg.
What religious doctrine was Theobald trying to foist on these Luxembourgites?
It was similar to a modern-day Scientology, if you will.
So, utter shite.
Indeed, a cult following based on the crazed writings of medieval novelist Roger the Cupboard.
Were Theobald and his men repelled by the Luxembourgerons?
No, the invading force retreated of its own free will.
Really? Why?
At that time, Luxembourg was totally devoid of cheese.
Oh, of course. How could the French possibly stay? Is it fair to say, Milton, that the media was losing interest in the Crusades at this time?
You bet. It was the Apollo landings all over again.
The Crusades petering out signaled the decline of the Middle Ages. Battles continued to be won and lost. Edward I conquered Wales, but quickly gave it back once he'd seen the state it was in. At Bannockburn, the Jocks celebrated a famous victory over the English, and Robert Bruce rejoiced before changing his middle name from Steve to The. But this warring, this endless quest for power, would all come to naught when a flea jumped on a rat, and the rat jumped on a ship, and the ship sailed to the four corners of the earth. It's 1348, and the Black Death has descended on Europe. The bubonic plague would wipe out 50 million people in the time it takes for a 7-year-old horse to live. Doctors were clueless as to the origins of the pestilence and could offer no cure. Most shat themselves and legged it, leaving the public to cope alone. Cardinal Fangio Quark from an inner sanctum of the Vatican picks up the story.
In Italy, this plague was killing people like a mafia on steroids. The medics, chicken shit, did not want to know, and avanti they disappeared to Tuscany, Capri, and other middle-class vacation hotspots. With 0 treatments available, the Pope told his minions, "Fuck it, just give anything a go."
Whose picture do you have there?
This is Signor Raviolini, one of many citizens of Roma who spent months creating various remedies to combat the plague miasma.
Such as?
Remember, Signor Frampton, Raviolini was not a well man.
He had the pox?
See, but not this pox. He had the cockpox.
What did Raviolini come up with?
So, all his concoctions, his potions, were tainted by the machinations of a crazed mind. He proclaimed he could avoid catching the plague by throwing a wolfhound into the Tiber and eating a spoonful of crushed granite soon thereafter. Complete horseshit. Everybody who try, die.
Who else got involved, Cardinal Quark?
Giovanni Montevideo, a seafarer from Pompeii, told his immediate family to smear panna cotta, custard, smear it into their ears, exhale twice, and consume a magpie whole.
And?
Complete horseshit. Everybody who tried die.
Didn't someone from Florence suggest injecting bleach?
I do not believe this to be true.
But if the citizens had tried it?
Complete horseshit. Everybody who tried die.
By 1353, the rats, fleas, and suppurating buboes full of pus, blood, and milky seminal fluid were gone. With no natural aggressor, everyone reverted to type and began killing each other again. The 100-Year War between France and England did exactly what it said on the tin. A key battle of the conflict was here at Agincourt in northern France. Henry V had given up his job as a Shakespearean actor to lead the English troops into battle. On the feast day of St. Crispin, 1415, 6,000 English troops lined up against more than 30,000 French. Conventional wisdom suggests it was the English longbow that extinguished the French advance. The French, however, put their loss down to a collective dose of the squits. Just another bloody French excuse. By 1428, France had handed their country to the English sur une assiette. Its deposed king, Charles VII, was bereft of ideas to win his nation back. Then in stepped a girl.
Joan of Arc, born Joan Boulangerie, was barely 16 when she convinced Charles that God had sent her to lead his armies. Charles bought this piche, but only on the proviso Joan cut her hair, swore profusely when in company, and urinated standing up.
Agnes Mallory is an authority on French history and volunteers at her local bibliothèque.
Joan led the French troops to victory in the city of Orleans, and Charles got his throne back. Joan, however, was later captured and accused of witchcraft and dressing like a geezer. History tells us the Maid of Orleans was finally burnt at the stake after some less successful methods were employed to finish her off. Joan was subjected to hog trampling. She was kneed in the solar plexus repeatedly by a locksmith, forced to drink a potion of hemlock and Gatorade, and most diabolically, she was exposed to the inane banter of the English troops without ear defenders. Joan's executioner, Liam the Executioner, from Chelmsford in Essex, was summarily dismissed and replaced by his brother, Eric the Executioner, who promptly dispatched the tiresome girl with a bunch of twigs and a box of Swan Vesta.
By the middle of the 15th century, the 100 Years' War was over. The Eastern Roman Empire had been vanquished, and you could now legally burn a heretic without having to apply to the council. The world was quickly moving into a period of renaissance and invention, spurred on by the new monarchies that made the common man their bitches. With the prospect of so much advancement on the horizon, it seemed safe to assume that nothing could go wrong now. Next time on A Brief History of Failure. As the War of Roses ebbs and flows, and the War of Pansies sees an exchange of niceties, the House of Tudor prevails, and the true spirit of married life begins to shine through.
I did a tryout for the job as Henry VIII's executioner, but it took me 3 days to remove the head of his stable girl. Didn't realise I had a blunt axe,
as its first Tsar comes to power, Russia is at once a powerhouse to be reckoned with.
The first attempts at a moniker for the Tsar were plainly awful. You had Ivan the Gullible, Ivan the Risible. Some idiot actually strolled into the palace of Moscow and proclaimed him Ivan the Invisible when he was clearly opaque.
And as things are about to warm up in London, I'll be finding out why the Pilgrim Mothers sailed off and founded the Isle of Wight. All this and more next time on A Brief History of Failure. A Brief History of Failure was written, produced and performed by me, Aid Corey. A book of this podcast is available on Amazon.